Hello everyone, here's something I tentatively teased in last week's video. I'm not sure I want to call this a full-blown solo review. It's more like what else I saw in April 2021, movie number 4, the extended edition. As I said before, this is a big film. By that I mean it's important and influential, heavy with cultural and cinematic significance, and therefore intimidating to talk about in an open forum on the internet like this. In the last 71 years, this film has been discussed and analyzed from every possible angle. What on earth can I have to say that hasn't been brought up already? That's why I had no intention of doing a solo review of this movie when I watched it the first time a couple weeks ago, but as I was struggling to organize my notes for the What Else I Saw in April video, I kept coming up with more things to say, and eventually I told myself to stop fussing around, stop trying to condense my comments, and just make a separate video. I feel ill-equipped for this, but for those of you who would like to hear my thoughts on this much dissected and much praised Japanese classic, here we go! Movie number 4 is 1950's Rashomon, directed by Akira Kurosawa and featuring Toshiro Mifune, Machiko Kyo, Takashi Shimura, and Masayuki Mori. The story is concerned with the murder of a samurai and the rape of his bride, but 4 eyewitnesses tell very different versions of what happened. I'll get this out of the way first. One of the reasons why I have dragged my feet on watching this movie for 9 years? I was first told to watch it in 2012, so 9 years, is the subject matter. Not the murder, the rape. I have always been wary of how this element would be handled, how uncomfortable it might be. However, there's nothing explicit or graphic in this film. It's handled in typical, tasteful, old movie fashion. It is a crucial part of the plot, though, all the way through, and among the variations on the truth that the audience hears is the possibility that what happened might not have been entirely non-consensual. To my understanding, this is not the first film to show scenes replay from different points of view with major differences. Some of you may remember that a few months ago I talked about a Spanish film, Dos Monjes, or Two Monks, from 1934, which does something similar with dual flashbacks. One character tells a story, but then a second character recounts his version, and the audience sees alternate versions of certain scenes with new, revealing details, thereby giving the audience a more expansive understanding of what happened. I don't know if that movie was an influence here or not, and I can't recall right now if there are other older films that do something similar. Regardless, Rashomon took the concept of showing the storyteller's subjectivity and ran with it. Director Akira Kurosawa's film turned out to be a major global success and became so famous and familiar in the cultural lexicon that its title was used to coin a term, the Rashomon effect, referring to the phenomena when multiple eyewitnesses give contradictory descriptions of a particular event. Now, I went into this movie knowing the basics, but not much else, and I think that turned out pretty well. So, those of you who haven't seen the movie but are planning to, you might want to know that the following discussion contains some spoilers. The film has a relatively small cast of characters, including the 3 principals involved in the incident, the bandit, the samurai, and the samurai's bride, plus the woodcutter who found the body, the priest who was last to see the victim alive, and the commoner who's hearing the whole sordid story for the first time after the trial. I thought acting-wise, Toshiro Mifune as the bandit and Machiko Kyo as the bride were particularly good, and of course one can't leave out Takashi Shimura's compelling woodcutter. I should probably mention here, in case it's not obvious, I don't speak Japanese, and I don't know exactly how to pronounce the names the best way. I'm just trying my best, and hopefully the result is sufficient. My experience with Mifune is still limited compared to some of you who are watching this video. I've seen him in only 9.5 movies, which sounds like a lot, especially if you're one of the other people watching this video and you're thinking, I haven't seen him in anything. Who? But trust me, in the body of his work, 9.5 movies are a drop in the bucket. I pay attention, though, and I've noticed that he tends to dominate the screen in a quietly powerful way. He's not so quiet here, of course. The character Tajomaru is like a wild animal. He's kind of insane and living for the thrill of the chase as much as the moment of conquest. The bandit scratches himself and slaps at imperceptible bugs, too, like Mifune's lone samurai character in Yojimbo and Sanjuro. But while that lone samurai could be classified as, let's say, neutral or even chaotic good, Tajomaru is more chaotic evil. Yet at times, in 3 of the 4 accounts, even this thief is not without honor and a sense of fair play. This movie's like a lesson in obfuscation. You hear the first testimony and think, oh, okay, surprising, but sounds pretty straightforward. And then you hear the second one and think, that changes things. And then the third one comes along and takes this weird, fantastical turn, and then by the end, we're in the same boat as the men at the Rashomon gatehouse, confused, confounded, and disillusioned. The display of selfishness and lawlessness in this incident is disturbing, no matter which story is true. I think we're all naturally disposed to doubt the thief. It's our inclination before he even opens his mouth. But for all we know, he could be telling the truth. Then again, the bride, as the surviving victim, is the one you might expect to be the most credible and most sympathetic witness. But things aren't as they seem. Her story, heavy with shame, is complicated and sketchy, and her own testimony does not absolve her of guilt. I'll also point out that the men discredit her story immediately before and again immediately after she tells it. It seems that no matter which version of the story we're hearing, she comes out looking the worst. It's her behavior in the flashbacks that varies the most, and even the bandit, in 2 versions, finds her conduct disturbing. As the bride, Machiko Kyo has to convey just about every emotion, and does so most convincingly, making the character a startlingly unpredictable player in the drama. The most shocking testimony, I think, is that of the dead samurai, who tells his side of the tale through a medium. The medium's performance is like something straight out of a horror movie. It's definitely a spooky and unexpected turn of events, especially with his groaning voice coming out of the woman's mouth. The samurai's version of what happened should be the most valid, right? After all, as the priest says, dead men don't lie, and assuming you accept that the medium isn't just playing a trick, the samurai, being dead already, doesn't have anything to gain or lose by not telling the truth. Does he? And what about the woodcutter? He looks the most honest of the 4, but I've already heard 3 liars, so I'm pretty cynical at this point. By the end, I feel like the judge in What's Up, Doc. I've tried to keep up, but I don't know what's true and what's not, so you're all guilty! So you might be watching this video and wondering, did she like the movie? Yes, I did. At first, when it was over, my main feeling was, okay, I finally watched it. That was Rashomon. It was interesting. Afterward, though, I found that I continued to think about it and contemplate its themes, its examination of psychological responses to a traumatic incident, its portrayal of human nature, and the part culture plays in all of it. And keep in mind, this is a depiction of feudal Japan from a post-war mid-20th century standpoint, and it's being viewed 71 years later by an American who's no expert on feudal Japanese history. What I really kept ruminating on was the idea of subjective storytelling and what the film suggests about the reliability of witnesses, our innate inability to tell the truth, why we lie, how we lie, and the meaning of truth itself. Something I ended up thinking about, and forgive me if this goes way off topic, is how I tend to take the stories people tell with a grain of salt. That's not a trust issue, although you shouldn't believe everything you hear. Rather, I've learned that when anyone tells a story, there's bound to be some personal interference. Ask two people to describe the same incident that they both witnessed, or to retell a famous story, and you won't get an identical result. We each have our own experiences, worldviews, interpretations, intellects. These factors and others influence our perception. We are natural-born storytellers. Most of us, even us introverts, long to communicate, and we do so most often with words and stories. That's good. But we're all, to varying degrees, unreliable narrators. Very few people are able to describe an incident without putting their own spin on it. Little things. I'm not talking about just, oops, I forgot a detail. I mean the inclusion of a particular adjective that has a connotation to it, a side comment, a change in dialogue, or a dismissive tone of voice. These are all things that can alter the listener's reception and understanding of an event. Taking it a step further and making it more relevant to our main topic, if we're called on to recount the details of an event which may cause conflict, or put the blame on some person, or put us in a negative light, then self-preservation kicks in, which can make us even less willing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now, Rashomon doesn't deal so much with speech and language. It's not about minor discrepancies in eyewitness accounts. It's not about four people perceiving an incident four different ways. It's about contradictory testimonies and characters telling huge whoppers for reasons that are unclear. But it led me down this road of reflection, and I think that illustrates why, after all these years, people still get excited talking about this movie. It makes your gears turn. Not to mention that, yes, absolutely, it's a well-made film and visually arresting. I haven't seen so many Kurosawa films, but remarkable cinematography is something I've come to expect from him. Things like the use of light and shadow, incorporation of the elements, particularly in this case rain and wind, creative framing to communicate drama. These are all prevalent here, and there are images that have been copied in later movies. I have two observations about the music composed by Fumio Hayasaka, and I guess I'll drop these here. Number one, the music, as we spend a couple minutes following the woodcutter deeper into the woods near the beginning, seems to pull us in, like we're being lured down a rabbit hole. Or, since this story isn't quite wackadoodle enough to be compared to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, it's like we're being pulled into a dark fairy tale world. Isn't the Stephen Sondheim musical Into the Woods about characters entering the woods and encountering trouble and temptation? I get the same magical, foreboding vibe from the music here, which suggests that the forest is a world apart, a dreamy place outside of reality or outside of the laws of civilization where anything can happen and no one will know. The emphasis on setting, by the way, is further amplified when you consider that Rashomon is based on a 1922 short story by Ryunosuke Akutagawa titled Yabu no Naka, or In a Grove. It's interesting, then, that they went with Rashomon, the name of the gatehouse where the three men talk after the trial, instead. The second musical observation has to do with the bride's account. As my mom and I were watching and listening to that sequence, we suddenly turned to each other and said, "That's Bolero!" The similarity of the music here to Maurice Ravel's Bolero, published 1928, is uncanny, so much so that I had to wonder if it was intentional. It turns out it was. Hayasaka was inspired by Bolero when he wrote that section of the score. If you're familiar with the original, it's very noticeable. And a little distracting. A provocative thing about Rashomon is that, to my understanding at least, we never do find out what really happened. The film makes us lean in a certain direction, but I don't know. I still have doubts, partly because each witness's performance is so convincing. What is the absolute truth? And there has to be an absolute truth. I know postmodern relativist thinking rejects that statement as anathema, but something happened. The last testimony put forth, which may be the truth, doesn't really give the viewer a sense of satisfaction or resolution. I think that's because the question of who killed the samurai, which is something 3 people claim to have done, is not actually the main point. This isn't a mystery where a detective's trying to uncover who done it, and at the end one of the characters is unmasked as the true killer and everything wraps up with a neat little bow. The tale is messy and confusing, and ultimately more about the psychology of human behavior, both in the grove and out of it. Does the movie end on a positive or negative statement? You're invited to take from it what you will. There is that lack of resolution as far as the incident itself goes, at least in my mind. But then the woodcutter saves an abandoned baby and says he'll bring it home to raise with his own 6 kids, a truly selfless and altruistic act. I could point out that he doesn't produce any evidence to prove what he says is true, and we don't go with him to corroborate his statement. The movie's made me question everyone else. Why should he be any different? But looking at Shimura's earnest expression, I want to believe him. He's certainly more sympathetic than the other witnesses, and the priest's faith in humanity is restored by his action. Partly because of the subject matter, and partly because of the historical period, which isn't one I've ever been drawn to, I didn't come away from the movie with a feeling that I couldn't wait to see it again sometime. But there's a lot I appreciated on the first round about the performances, the photography, the editing, the concept, and so on. However, when I changed my mind and decided to do a separate video for Rashomon, that meant going through it again at a much slower pace to get images and any video clips I might want to use. And when I did that, as is so often the case, I was able to appreciate more the subtler touches that I might have seen and might have picked up on the first viewing, but that I couldn't fully enjoy the first time, when I needed to pay close attention to the unfamiliar story and the dialogue and characterizations. Things I noticed on the second round include how excellent the music cues throughout the film are. The score is as much a part of telling the story here as the photography, narration, editing, and so on. How many times the camera has us pushing through trees and shrubbery, and either the characters are ahead of us and slightly obscured, or we're slightly ahead of them, waiting. How many angles are used to shoot the woodcutter's walk through the woods? It has aesthetic purpose, and yet there's also a sense of voyeurism, like something's lurking in the forest watching him enter. The twist is, he's the one who was watching all along. How often the three main characters in the triangle appear in the same shot, and by extension, how deep focus photography is employed to maintain the clarity of background, middle ground, and foreground images. How images of idyllic peace and tranquility are juxtaposed with scenes of viciousness and betrayal. How the bandit's unbridled virility is contrasted with the stiff, cautious samurai, and what part that might play in the woman's reactions. How intensely active the camera is, often starting on a static shot and then easing in, or turning, directing our eyes, and stretching out the tension. How the sword fight choreography changes in each version of the story. In one instance, I felt surprised that the samurai wasn't the smooth and cunning swordsman I'd expected him to be, but on second thought, I realized a key factor may be that his heart's not really in it. Plus, he's dealing with an unhinged, wily man who doesn't live by the same code. Then the last sword fight is hardly a sword fight at all, more a prolonged scrap in the dirt and leaves between two suddenly inept, desperate men who aren't even sure why they're fighting. It's a huge difference from the first fight, where they both want to win, but also fight with a sense of honor. These are all details that I saw before, but that I became more conscious of, and was more free to enjoy on the second viewing. Plenty more could be said about this classic film, and has been, but I think I'm going to leave it there. Those are my first and subsequent impressions of Rashomon, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I anticipate that some of you will have some interesting observations to make on this film, and I look forward to reading those in the comments below. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching!